Ladies and gentlemen, my name is LJ Stambuk. I'm the President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, and I want to welcome you here tonight. We're delighted to have you. We're delighted to have Rick Steves here in town with us again. This is the second time in 2 years that he's visiting with us. Last time we had a full house, and here is Rick. Last time we had a full house, and today we even have a more fuller house. So we're looking forward in 2 years to pack the whole hotel and see you again. It is my privilege to introduce to you the sponsors of today's program. Lufthansa Group, Lufthansa German Airlines, Walker and Associates, and Providence Day School, the first school in the nation to offer a global studies diploma to its students. And here are some students. Thank you for coming. Thank you to our sponsors. I also would like very quickly to run you through some programs that are coming up at the World Affairs Council of Charlotte. On April 4th, 2013, we have the Ambassador of Canada to the US, His Excellency Gary Dorr. There will be a luncheon and an evening program. On April 11, we have a private dinner with Eli Groner, who is the Minister of Economic Affairs in the US Embassy of Israel. April 17, we have our gala event, the World Citizen Award Dinner, and we're honoring Margaret and Smokey Bissell. We're very delighted to have them as the World Citizen awardees this year. On May 30th, we have the Ambassador of South Africa to the US, His Excellency Ibrahim Rasool. And finally, on June 6th, we have a business breakfast program with Ronnie Bryant, who's the President and CEO of the Charlotte Regional Partnership, and he will be speaking on the growing relations between Charlotte and Brazil. And finally, and also quickly, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ann Boykin. Ann is the District Sales Manager for Lufthansa for North Carolina, South Carolina, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia. The district represents approximately 167 million in 2012 in flights. In addition to her responsibility for corporate sales, she represents the Lufthansa Group on sales-related topics pertaining to the US government and Fly America in cooperation with United Airlines and the Star Alliance. The Carolinas are very important to Lufthansa, and they're new to Anne's responsibility this year. It's a quite exciting opportunity, as she says. Lufthansa is proud to serve Charlotte. Munich service continues. It started in 2004, and we're all hopeful it will continue. Anne is pleased to be joined tonight by her colleague, Mr. Jihan Lucas, the inside sales representative for the Carolinas, with a number of Jihan's most important local travel management companies and clients. Thank you, Lufthansa. Thank you all for being here, and I would like to call Anne to come to the podium. Anne?
Hi. When I was asked to introduce Mr. Rick Steves, it reminded me of the Oscars. I'm not sure if you all saw the Oscars late this year, but there was a very funny incident where the host came up to the microphone and said, "Our next presenter needs no introduction." And he left the stage, and Meryl Streep came out. And so I thought I could do that tonight, but once I read his biography, it was too good not to share with you. So please allow me to tell you a little bit more about Rick Steves, maybe that you don't know. Rick Steves advocates smart, affordable, perspective broadening travel. As host and writer of the popular public television series Rick Steves Europe and best-selling author of over 50 European travel books, he encourages Americans to travel as temporary locals. He helps American travelers connect much more intimately and authentically with Europe and Europeans for a fraction of what mainstream tourists pay. Over the past 20 years, Rick has hosted over 100 travel shows for public television and numerous pledge specials, raising millions of dollars for local stations. His Rick Steves Europe TV series is carried by over 300 stations, reaching 95% of US markets. Rick has also created 2 award-winning specials for public television. I think I talked to a number of you who mentioned these tonight. Rick Steves' European Christmas and the groundbreaking Rick Steves' Iran. Rick writes and co-produces his television programs through his company, Backdoor Productions. Rick Steves also hosts a weekly public radio program, Travel with Rick Steves, with a broader approach to travel everywhere. In each hour-long program, Rick interviews guest travel experts, followed by listener call-ins. Travel with Rick Steves airs across the country and has spawned a popular podcast. Rick has also created a series of audio walking tour podcasts for museums and neighborhoods in Paris, Rome, Florence, Venice, London, and Athens. Rick self-published the first edition of his travel skills book, Europe Through the Back Door, which is now updated annually, in 1980. He has also written more than 50 other country, city, and regional guidebooks, phrase books, and snapshot guides. For several years, Rick Steves' Italy has been the best-selling international guidebook sold in the US. In 2009, Rick tackled a new genre of travel writing with Travel as a Political Act, reflecting on how the life of travel has broadened his own perspectives and how travel can be a significant force for peace and understanding in the world. Rick's books are published by Avalon Travel, a member of the Perseus Books groups. In addition to his guidebooks, TV, and radio work, Rick is a syndicated newspaper columnist with the Tribune Media Services. He appears frequently on television, radio, and online as the leading authority on European travel. Rick took his first trip to Europe in 1969, visiting piano factories with his father, a piano importer. By the time he reached 18, Rick jokes, I realized I didn't need my parents to travel, and he began traveling on his own, funding his trips by teaching piano lessons. In 1976, he started Europe Through the Back Door, ETBD for those of us in the business, and a business which has grown from a one-man operation to a company of well-traveled staff of 80 full-time employees. ETBD offers free travel information through its Travel Center website, www.ricksteves.com, European Rail Pass Guide, and free travel newsletters. ETBD also runs a successful European tour program with more than 450 departures, attracting around 12,000 travelers annually. Rick is outspoken on the need for Americans to fit better into our planet by broadening their perspectives through travel. He is also committed to his own neighborhood. He is an active member of the Lutheran Church and has hosted ELCA's national video productions. He is a board member of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and Rick has provided his local YWCA with a 24-unit apartment building with which to house homeless mothers. Rick Steves spends about a third of the year every year in Europe researching guidebooks, filming TV shows, and making new discoveries for us travelers. Rick was divorced in March 2010. He lives and works in his hometown of Edmonds, Washington, where his office window overlooks his old junior high school. That was a lot of information, but I think just setting the stage for tonight. So please help me in welcoming Rick.
Thank you. Whoa. So now you know all about me, and we'll just have questions. No, it's listening to all of that, I thought, boy, that sounds exhausting. And I've just found for me, I found my niche, and it's so much fun to be able to travel. And I've spent a third of my adult life living out of a 9 by 22 by 14-inch carry-on-the-airplane-sized suitcase. And when I look back on that, it has been, I figure, time and money really well spent. It helps me just embrace life and celebrate the world, and also I found my teaching niche. And for 30 years, I've been teaching travel. And as Ann mentioned, now I have 80 people that work with me in Seattle. And we're doing the same thing that I did back when I was a student. We're just trying to make all the mistakes. When I get ripped off, I celebrate. They don't know who they just ripped off. I'm going to take notes and learn that scam and share it with people back home so they'll know what the story is. And we want people to learn from our mistakes so they can enjoy maximum travel thrills for every mile, minute, and dollar in their next trip. So for like 30 years, I've been teaching this, and I didn't have a grand plan, but I've seen my passion for travel evolve in a kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs way. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? First you take care of your basic stuff, then you get more creative and fulfilled and maybe even altruistic as you get more meaning and purpose in your life. Well, for the 80s, it was all about just budget travel tricks. Catch the train, pack light, stay healthy, find a good meal, where do we get affordable bed? That was Europe through the back door. And then in the 90s, I wrote a book called Europe 101, and that was moving up on that hierarchy of travelers' needs. It was getting excited and into the history and the art and the cuisine and the wine and the culture and all that. And that was, because you've already caught the train and you got a hotel, what are you here for? To experience and understand all that stuff. And then so that was the 90s for me in my teaching. I didn't have a big plan, as I mentioned. It was just a natural sort of evolution in what I like to talk about when I'm with a group of travelers like this. And then in the last decade, actually from about 9/12, I have found myself really passionate about trying to encourage and inspire and equip Americans to get out of their comfort zone and hang out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given and gain an empathy for the other 96% of humanity through our travels. And in doing so, bring home what I think is the very best souvenir, a broader perspective. And I think that's what the World Affairs Council is all about. Celebrating the diversity on this planet rather than being afraid of it. Building bridges instead of walls. Even if all you care about is national security and that your kids will think just like you do, it's better to have bridges than walls. Okay, that's a little bit beyond some people's experience, but that's, I think, because there's a lot of fear in our society. Have you noticed how much fear there is in our society these days? It's amazing. People are just pushing fear on us, and I find that fear is for people who don't get out very much. And I'm not particularly courageous, but I've just traveled enough to see through the hysterical news when it comes to shaping my perspective on where I can travel, Next month I'm going to go to Egypt. I'm going to have a real good time. That may be taking it to the limit, but, I just think I'm not particularly courageous. I'm just less vulnerable to hysterical, fear-mongering news. I think the flip side of fear is understanding. And we gain understanding when we associate with groups like this, when we enjoy public television, when we travel, when we get out of our comfort zone, when we are stimulated. That's what carbonates your existence, is to get out there. So what I want to talk about today is this whole notion of travel as a political act. And I never wanted to go to Europe. As was mentioned, my parents dragged me there when I was a kid, 14 years old. I didn't want to go. My dad was importing pianos from Germany, so we had to see the piano factories in Germany. I thought it was a stupid idea. I was a 14-year-old with a bad attitude. Got over there, and on about day 3, it occurred to me, it's not all that bad. It's tough for a 14-year-old to change their mind and actually admit that their parents were right. But I got over there, and it was actually kind of fun. There was different pop and different candy. I distinctly remember in Germany statuesque women with hairy armpits. A few years later, I was with my parents again, and I was in the Copenhagen train station, surrounded by kids just a couple years older than me, with Eurail passes, little backpacks. Europe was their playground. Exciting destinations clicking up on the departure board in those traditional train stations. Remember that? Berlin, Amsterdam, Stockholm. I looked at those kids. They were free as the wind. Europe was their playground. And I looked at my parents, and I thought, I don't need you guys for this. I can go to Europe, too. So I was a piano teacher back then. Kids wouldn't practice in the summer. So I just said, I'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe. And every year I was learning from my mistakes. I was becoming a pretty darn good little traveler. And what was striking to me is other people were making the same mistakes I had made the year before. And I thought, this is really a shame. If I could just package the lessons I've learned from my mistakes cleverly into a guidebook or a talk or something like that, other people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own, have a better trip, and I would have a good excuse to go back to Europe every year and update my material. So that's what I've been doing for 30 years now. I spend 4 months a year in Europe, April and May in the Mediterranean. I go home in June. July and August, I'm north of the Alps. And as I mentioned, I'm doing the same thing now as I was back then, except I've got 80 people working with me and technology beyond my wildest dreams to amplify my teaching. So I just love this work. I'm going to Europe first of the next month, and I'll be over there for 60 days, working 60 14-hour days in a row, and I'll come home feeling younger and healthier than when I left. It's just my energy source is traveling around Europe and learning about all that stuff. So it's fun for me to have about an hour today to share with you some of my ideas. Before I get into the talk, I just want to do a little bit of announcements and stuff here, because the World Affairs Council has picked up a bunch of these books, and they're selling them, and I'm sure they'd love to sell them, and they're all at very special prices, and by buying them you would get the books at the best prices you'll ever see, and you will also support the World Affairs Council because they'll make some money, and you won't have to take notes tonight. So let's see, Europe Through the Back Door. That's that book I was talking about, all the skills. This is 800 pages. You could think of it as the Kama Sutra of European travel fun, okay? Everything you need to know to have the trip of a lifetime. And they're selling it it retails for $23. They're selling it for $20. That's the brand new 30th edition. Our new TV series has 10 shows, and it's very heavy on the great cities in Europe. We just filmed this in the last 2 years. Most of these were shot just this last summer. 10 shows on Paris, London, Venice, Florence, and Rome, and a bonus show on northern England, hiking Hadrian's Wall and up in the Cumbrian Lakes District. I just love these shows, but these are our 10 newest shows, and they've got it's a 2-disc set, so it's like, what would that be, 5 hours of TV? And that's $20 if you like. This is the first time I've ever had this to sell at one of these talks. This is a brand new thing I just completed, and it's airing all over the country now. It's called Rick Steves' Europe, A Symphonic Journey. And what I did was I partnered with my local symphony orchestra to celebrate romantic music and national movements of the late 19th century. It's very cool to think 7 different countries in Europe were testing their nationalism at the same time we were having our civil war. It's no coincidence. Italy was being formed, Germany was being formed, the United States was trying to be torn apart, and it was fighting over which it would be. Norway was establishing itself independent from Sweden. The French were, establishing government by, for, and of the people rather than the old regime, divine monarchs. And they had music to help trumpet their causes. And I really like to fight ethnocentrism any way I can. And I'm always amazed at how Americans get all excited when they hear Aaron Copland or when they hear this Star Spangled Banner or whatever, and that's beautiful, and my heart starts to pump faster when I hear that too. But when you go to Norway, they don't get excited about the Star Spangled Banner, but their heart does the same flip-flops when they hear Edvard Grieg. And then when you go to Czech Republic, it's Smetana. And when you go to Italy, it's Verdi. And all of these guys were writing in the same generation. So what we did was I do my little tour guide intro, and then we have the orchestra strike up, and then we cut all sorts of beautiful images from each of those countries in while the orchestra's playing. And my staff did a great job of this, and we have that available here. So the CD of the concert, the DVD, and a book about that whole notion of romanticism and nationalism is in here. And this is also available for $20. And then the textbook for this talk they have out in the lobby for $15. And that's I thought I would, when I wrote this book, I thought I would just give a long version of the talk I'm going to give you tonight, but it reads terrible. So it just didn't work, and I was going to give up the project. But then I realized the book should be all of the real travel anecdotes from where all this came. So these are field studies, kind of developing a broader perspective. And if you like what you hear tonight, I think you'd enjoy reading this book. It's a lot more information than what I'll be able to talk, and that's $15. So again, all those are out there. My friend Keith from our office in Seattle is one of our tour guides, and he's driving me around. I'm going to 12 cities in 12 days all over this part of the country. And we've got a lot of people want to hear me talk about my budget travel talk and how to travel in Europe, and I'm not giving that talk tonight, but if you wanted to hear that, I've got that talk on this DVD, and it's free, okay? So if you go out there, if you want the talk, I don't have enough for absolutely everybody, but if you could limit it to 1 per family and so on, I think we got enough. But there's 3 hours of travel information on this disc, our 3 new shows about how to travel filmed in Europe this last summer, and then the hour-long lecture I give on how to travel smartly is in here, plus a front row seat on one of our tours, giving you an hour look at what our tours are like, designed basically to scare away the high-maintenance people, okay? So you've got all that information on here if you would like. Our tour program is the most exciting part of our work these days. We took, as was mentioned, 12,000 people on our tours this last year on 400 different tours, and more than half of them were return customers, and it's just something we're very proud of. I stopped doing tours. I led the tours for 25 years myself, but now I take the tours instead of lead them. I sign up on a tour every year with a pseudonym, and it's fun. I get letters from myself, and and then I just drop in on one of the tours. I did Turkey last year. I'm going to Scotland this year. But this is our newsletter and our catalog, and there's plenty of these out there if you wanted that. And all that's with Keith out there. So thanks for allowing me to make that review of little announcements. And now let's talk about travel as a political act. As a travel writer, my job is to bring home the excitement, the magic. And it's many different kinds of magic. It can be an appreciation of natural wonders. I just love the opportunity to bring this stuff home. I mean, we have some exciting natural wonders in the United States, but what's cool about Europe's natural wonders is they're so accessible. You can ride the lift up for breakfast on a revolving restaurant on the peak of that mountain and then spend 3 hours in the morning walking on the ridge. Imagine tight roping on a ridge high above high up in the Alps. On one side you got lakes stretching all the way to Germany. On the other side you got cut glass peaks, the Eiger, Monk, and Jungfrau, the most incredible alpine panorama anywhere. And ahead of you, you got the long legato tones of an Alp horn. Doo, 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 reminding you that the helicopter-stocked mountain hut is open, it's just around the corner, and the coffee schnapps is on. That's a beautiful thing when you're hiking up in the Alps. You just get excited when you're in nature in your travels. You've also got culture, like you can't believe. Now, for 25 years, I was a tour guide, and I found with my groups of Americans, when I take them to Europe, if somebody is more excited and sophisticated about something and they want to share it, my Americans were inclined to draw back and be threatened by that. Are you saying you're more sophisticated than us, more cultured than us? And it's not that at all. It's just they're excited about stinky cheese. It's kind of like show and tell on Monday morning when you were in 3rd grade. Remember that? You'd come in and you'd show off whatever you did. You think it's cool. You're not better than everybody else. You just want everybody to know how cool this is. That's how Europeans are with their high culture. Everywhere you go, they're excited about the fine points of their culture. Cheese is a good example. When I grew up, cheese was no big deal. It was orange in the shape of the bread. Here you go, cheese sandwich. You go to Europe and people are evangelical about cheese. Especially in France. I mean, in France, the cheese shops are just a festival of mold. Now, if you've seen my TV shows, you know I love to be the cultural bumpkin. I just love, I'm wide-eyed, I'm curious, I'm steep on the learning curve. Blow me away with your cheese. A lady I know who runs a French restaurant, she takes me shopping in the morning. She takes me into the cheese shop, sorts through it all, picks up a moldy wad of cheese, takes a deep whiff. Oh, Rick, smell this cheese. It smells like the feet of angels. The feet of... Smells like stinky socks to me, but feet of angels, okay. Yeah, you don't have to love stinky cheese after that, but at least you go home knowing there are people that love fancy cheese. History becomes fun when you travel, if you travel thoughtfully. You know, for a lot of people, history is really a drag. But when you've traveled, history becomes so real, and you realize we're part of it. We're not just onlookers, we're in it. We are creators of history collectively. And when you travel, you need to be aware of that. I remember when I was in college, woke up in the dorm one morning and it occurred to me, well, actually I got a history degree accidentally. Okay, it occurred to me one morning, I've got 7 history classes under my belt, 3 more, and I'm a historian. Let's push on through, all right? I mean, it was just storytelling to me, all these great history classes, because I had been there. I had been there, and it had meaning to me. Here's a good example. I was in Berlin a few years ago on the opening week of their brand new parliament building, the Reichstag. And, you know, if you know your German history, this was bombed out in World War II. I mean, the last day of World War II was Germans fighting Russians on top of that dome. And it was a bombed out Hulk on no man's land with the Berlin Wall for a generation. Suddenly, the Cold War is over. The wall's down, the government's back in Berlin, they bring the city back together again, and they have this bombed out hulk of a parliament building, and they need to get a new parliament building. In good European style, they don't bulldoze it and build a new one, they renovate the historical one, and then they incorporate a modern element into the top of it, that beautiful glass dome. Now, I was there, luckily for me, on opening week, and I was on the very top. It's free, It's open very long hours, designed, for German citizens, but tourists are more than welcome to go up that spiral ramp all the way to the top and literally look down onto the legislators as they work. Powerful architectural symbolism. The Germans have been screwed around too much with their politicians over the last century. This is going to be a powerful statement that the German citizens will keep an eye on their politicians, looking over them. And those guys are down there working and voting, and the citizens are checking them out. It was beautiful to be up there. And I was up on top of that dome, surrounded by teary-eyed Germans. Now, anytime you're surrounded by teary-eyed Germans, something exceptional is going on. And it occurred to me, many of those teary eyes were old enough to remember when Berlin was just bombed flat after World War II in the 1940s. And today, this was a glorious, glorious sort of symbolic chapter. The opening of this building was the symbolic closing of an ugly chapter in the history of a great nation. No more division, no more communism, no more fascism. A united country looking into a promising future with a new parliament building. Wow. I was caught up in it. I was excited. And I looked around, and the other Americans up there did not have a clue. And it saddened me. I thought, I'm living in a dumbed-down society. And I've thought about this, and it's clear to me, powerful forces in our society will find it convenient if we're all just dumbed down. Just go shopping, we'll worry about it. If we're not careful, we're all going to become mindless producer consumers, and somebody's going to drive away with everything that we love about this country. It is critical that we expect our neighbors and the people we work with and the people we engage with to be engaged. And I vowed then and there as a travel writer that I'm going to expect my tourists, my readers, my viewers to be smarted up instead of dumbed down. You make more money off of people when you dumb them down. I mean, the real money in tourism is on the beach, and shopping. Duty-free shopping, frequent flyer miles, fun in the sun, bingo. Well, that's not bad in itself, but if it bullies you away from any thoughtfulness and any transformational value in your travels, then you're the loser. And I just don't like to see that happen. I'm so thankful I can make my TV shows in a network or in a system that actually respects people's intelligence and assumes an attention span and can create programming not shaped by advertiser interests, but shaped simply by a passion for better understanding our world. That's what public television is, and I feel myself getting into a pledge drive talk right now. But it is one little oasis on the dial where you can do that. The Travel Channel, think about it. You know the Travel Channel, it used to have travel, right? It doesn't have travel anymore. It's a circus. It's a freak show right now because that's where the ads are, because everybody's just dumbed down and that's what they want to watch, you see? So that's fine. But there's one little place for thoughtful people, and thank goodness, in commercial media. In our own realm, we need to be careful that we're not all dumbed down. When you travel, you find yourself out of your comfort zone, surrounded by people who see things differently than you, and that is really a healthy thing. I meet more different people in 1 month in Europe than I do for the rest of the year at home. This room right here is pretty darn homogenous, isn't it? So is my world in Seattle, where I live. It's just understandable. We all gather people with us that see things like us, and it's comfortable. But it is good once in a while to get out into a different situation where you're the oddity. I like it. It's healthy. It's stimulating. And when you travel, that happens. They don't need to be big, earth-shaking encounters, but you meet people who see things differently. I was in Italy a while ago, and this little kid was just staring at me. Finally, his dad said, "Excuse my son, he stares at Americans." And I asked him, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Well, last week at McDonald's, we were having our hamburger, and my son, noticing the fluffy white bun, asked me, he said, 'Dad, why do Americans have such soft bread?' And the dad said, 'Son, it's because Americans have no teeth.'" And I showed the kid my teeth to dispel that little bit of misunderstanding between peoples. And it reminded me, goofy as that is, there's all sorts of goofy misunderstandings between peoples. And when we travel, we can explain things. It's that simple. I used to travel a lot in Eastern Europe during the Cold War. I had friends in Bulgaria when the communists were running the thing. And these kids were raised in a communist school. And we'd sit down and have a few drinks and start talking, and we'd just get to share. I remember that once they asked me, Now, in America, everything's private property, so how can you go anywhere without trespassing? I mean, it's a reasonable bit of confusion if you grew up in a communist society, and I had to explain to him that, you can actually go places without trespassing. So it's just fun to get out and meet these people. I think one of my favorite countries is Ireland. And I love Ireland so much in part because in Ireland, I feel like I'm understanding a foreign language. Because I've never really felt that, but I only speak English. But in Ireland, everybody has that wonderful art of conversation, the gift of gab, and they love to talk. Now, if you want Ireland in the extreme, you go out to the west coast to a Gaeltacht, in the far west of Ireland, where they stand on the bluff and they look out at the Atlantic and they say, the next parish over is Boston. Now, this is a Gaeltacht. A Gaeltacht is where the government has decided it's worth spending a little money to keep the traditional lifestyle alive, so our big city kids can know from where they came. I mean, it's a goofy notion here because it just doesn't make any sense economically. They're subsidizing small family farms, but over there they think that's worth investing in. So you've got these parks that are national parks for the traditional lifestyle, and you go there, and these people are actually speaking Gaelic as their first language. A lot of people don't realize it, but the little languages of Europe are more widely spoken today than they were 50 years ago, as Europe is uniting. We'll talk about that in a bit. But when you walk up to these guys, they're talking to each other in Gaelic. And the tourist doesn't even realize it. And then they turn to you and talk to English, and then you say goodbye and they flip back into their Gaelic. And it is just enchanting when you talk with them. Forget my itinerary. When I start talking with Irish people in a pub or on the beach or something like that. I was talking to this guy, both these guys, and I asked the guy on the left, I asked him, were you born here? He thought about it and he said, no, it was about 5 miles down the road. Later on, I asked him, have you lived here all your life? And he said, not yet. It's so charming to me. I just love it. Now, the big news in Europe, of course, is the unification of Europe. Since World War II, Europe has evolved to become a European Union. It's an awkward, stuttering kind of evolution, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it is moving in that direction. Every time it takes a step back, there's headlines here in the United States, and we all think Europe is falling apart. But Europe is here to stay, and it's just a complicated thing. Because union is worthless without talking sovereign nations into giving up a little sovereignty. That's a tough sell, to get the Belgians to give up real sovereignty under the French or the Germans or whatever, you see. So it's a complicated movement. But it started back in 1947 when Europe was bombed out. Imagine statesmen and Eurocrats and Europhiles and philosophers and caring citizens getting together and saying, this is insane. Twice in our lifetimes we've bombed each other to smithereens. We've been doing that for history now just regularly for centuries. We got to do something radical. We got to weave our economies together again so we'll never again go to war. And they set out to create this European Union. And, it's been, as I mentioned, that stuttering evolution. But now you will never see another war in Europe again between Germany and France, which is a huge triumph. All the other silliness that bugs people about the European Union, any political correctness, any extra bureaucratic regulations and all that kind of stuff, pittance compared to the real accomplishment of the European Union. No more big wars between the superpowers in Europe. That's why they got the Nobel Peace Prize this last year. A lot of Americans kind of mocked it. What are you doing giving a whole continent the Peace Prize? It's a huge accomplishment that they have done, and it's not been easy. So that's very exciting about the European Union. The European Union was also created in order to create a free trade zone to compete with the free trade zone called the United States of America. Europe is a free trade zone of 400 million people that produces as much as we do, $15 trillion worth of stuff every year. We are 300 million people to produce $15 trillion of stuff. They are 400 million people to produce $15 trillion of stuff. Now, a lot of Americans who are threatened by European social sensibilities or socialism or whatever you want to call it, put Europe down because, look, they're a basket case. All that silly idealism, they don't produce as much as us. It takes them 400 million people to make what we do with 300 million. We win. Well, it's true. Europeans produce less per person than we do, but by any honest measure, Europeans produce as much per hour as we do, and they choose to work less hours. Now, it's not a judgmental statement. It's not a right or wrong. We have every right to work and work and work. We have the shortest vacations in the rich world, and we wish they were shorter. We are frantically working ourselves into early graves because we want to be even wealthier than we are. You know, that's just our style. And Europeans don't buy that. So it's just, you know, it's just a choice. When I go to Europe, I'm in Amsterdam on a Thursday afternoon, and I see these guys in a boat partying, and I kind of go, "Excuse me, is there a festival today?" And they go, "Yeah, it's Thursday. You want to come in?" They're just having a good time. Of course they work, but they also play more. And they just shake their heads looking at us like, what's with it over here? So now, of course, I'm a businessman, and I would much rather run my business here than Europe. I would be demoralized to employ people in Europe with all of their cumbersome, disillusioning, cumbersome bureaucracy and so on from an employer's point of view. I employ 80 people as a guerrilla entrepreneur. I make a lot of money. I have great products, and I employ people really well. That's because we have this American ability to do that, and Europe could learn from us. But we can also learn from Europe, too, about some of the ways that they're able to organize their society, and it's a fun challenge for all of us. Now, we have this economic crisis, and me as a tour organizer and a travel teacher, a lot of people are asking me, is it safe to go to Europe with all of the economic chaos over there, you know? And I have to deal with this. Well, let me talk about it just for a minute. I'll give you my tour guide's take on the economy situation. First of all, who gets to call these things an economic crisis? A financial crisis. We're in a financial crisis, right? Everybody would just accept that. Well, 90% of humanity wishes they had our crisis. We are filthy rich on a global scale. Half of humanity is trying to live on $2 a day. That's the crisis, if you're honest. Now, I don't want to belittle somebody's problems if they're unemployed or their business just went out. That's serious. But as a society, we are doing great. And last year, in our financial crisis, we only grew at 2%. It's pedal to the metal, balls to the walls. Screw the environment, screw the future, screw the poor. We got to grow faster. And we're already there. If there is a crisis, I would say it's a crisis of distribution within our wealth. But that's a whole different lecture. Now, in Europe, they've got a similar situation. I think Europeans, like Americans, have conned themselves into thinking they're wealthier than they are. And for many years, they've been consuming more than they've been producing. You can only do that for so long. You can only goose that system to pay for it so long. You can only borrow from the future so long, and then you've got a reckoning. And Europe is having a reckoning now. They're living beyond their means. They have lavish entitlements over there, even more lavish than our entitlements. Our entitlements and their entitlements were perfectly logical and sustainable when they were dreamed up because they were young societies that didn't live very long. Lots of young people working, subsidizing a system that took good care of people after they retired. Lots of young people working, not many people living to retirement, and those who didn't live very long after that. No problem, we can do that forever. When a society gets successful, and Europe is the most successful by most measures, it gets more affluent and better educated. When you get richer and smarter, you have less kids, and you live longer. That's just demographics. That's just a fact. When you get richer and smarter, you live longer, and you have less kids. Europe is the richest and the smartest. They live the longest, and they have the fewest kids. Right? So you had that pyramid-shaped demographic situation to sustain their really luxurious entitlements. Now you flip-flopped it. A few people working, a lot of people retiring, and they live way too long. And it just doesn't add up. You can imagine the arithmetic's just not there. Now, the sorry lot in life for a politician in Europe is to stand before their electorate and say, sorry, you don't get the promise. Your parents got it. We promised you it. You've worked your life for this promise. Your friends got it who retired 5 years ago, but you don't get it. You got to work 10 more years. And then, even then, we can't promise you'll have anything left because we've already taken it. You know, that's enough to make people burn a Starbucks. Good, decent people burn a Starbucks when they're told that. and Europeans are out there marching. It's frustrating if you're a working person in Europe right now, you see. And Europeans really get into marching. I find it's just in there, it's a part of the way they vent, the way they exercise their freedom. I think it's a healthy thing to be out marching. In France, la manifestation, that's what they do. Now, marching like that is just way too much exercise for most Americans. We go home and we find a TV station that affirms our frustrations, and then we just shake our fists all at the same time. You see, that's how we march. And I find it fascinating. Now, getting back to the issue, can you travel in Greece? Yes, you can travel in Greece. There's 10 million people in Greece. They're having very tough times. I wouldn't want to be a worker in Greece. There's going to be strikes, there's going to be marches, but I've got tourists going to Greece all year long. We're having a blast. I was just there. I'm going to Greece, I'm going to Italy, Spain, and Portugal this year. We're taking thousands of people there. We're having fun. It's just reality. You see, there is La La Land. That's what Orlando is for. You can go to Orlando for the rest of your life and let TV news shape your perspective and probably go to your grave happy, you know. Thomas Jefferson said, travel makes a person wiser, if less happy. I have an appetite for the rest of the world. It's just fun for me to go out there and talk to people about how they're dealing with the same problems we are. Big news in Europe, of course, is the movement to the east. A few years ago, the entire Warsaw Pact country joined the European Union. Overnight, the geographic center of Europe shifts from from Belgium to the Czech Republic. And overnight, you got 100 million new capitalists. It's really an amazing thing. When you think about Eastern Europe, I think back in the Cold War days when they had how dreary and how demoralizing it was. And then I think today how it's a festival of pent-up entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, it is really exciting to see them catching up with the West now that they got their freedom. But if you're as old as me and you've traveled in Eastern Europe, you remember the Cold War days when things were so bleak that in Poland, people were taking their windshield wipers in with them at night. Why? Because they had a stupid command economy, ignoring the laws of supply and demand. Somebody upstairs forgot to order windshield wipers. The demand exceeds the supply. Thieves get wind of that. They steal your windshield wipers and sell them for a fortune on the black market. That's just how and why black markets work. Well, today, of course, the laws of supply and demand are kicking in. There's enough windshield wipers to meet the demand, and people are leaving their wipers on their car all night long in Warsaw. It's interesting to be traveling through Eastern Europe and see what's going on. Now, one of the real charms of Europe for me is the variety of cultures and the diversity. And you would think as Europe unites, and they've all got the same coins, 300 million people, the same coins in their pocket. You don't have to show your passport when you cross the border. In Europe, they've got even in tight times, they've got a well-funded program called the Erasmus program that pays for students and teachers to work and study in neighboring countries so they can all better understand each other and work better together in their economic union. You'd think it would all become homogenized. But the counterintuitive result of all that is they're becoming more vigorously distinct. Now, let me explain a little bit why. First of all, in our lifetimes, the headlines have been filled with regions challenging nations. There's 3 levels of loyalty in Europe: regions, nations, and Europe. If you talk to somebody in Munich and you say, where are you from? They could say, I'm Bavarian. We were ruled by the Wittelsbach family for 600 years. That's the Wittelsbach Palace. Bavaria was a middle-sized European power until 1870 when all of us German-speaking people decided to unite. They could say, I'm German. We're a country the size of Montana with 1/3 the capacity, industrial capacity, and 1/3 of the population of the entire United States of America. Look what we can do. Or they will say, I'm a European. We've just united 25 countries for peace and for free trade. There's 3 different, identities. If you ask somebody in Barcelona, where are you from? They could say, I'm Catalonian. We teach our kids to speak Catalonian, and they learn Spanish as a second language. Or they could say, I'm Spanish. Or they could say, I'm European. You see, they've got those different ways to see themselves. Now, every city hall in Europe will have 3 flags on it: the region, the nation, and Europe. As nations are withering away, the Basques no longer threaten Madrid. The Celtic people in Brittany no longer threaten Paris, and the Irish and the Scottish no longer threaten London. You can secede from Spain, but you cannot secede from Europe. So Brussels is becoming the power of the future. Nations don't care so much. And for the first time since 1707, Scottish people have a parliament not in London, but in Edinburgh. That's pretty exciting. The local regions are able to wave their flags with a little more vigor. Now, after Mass in Catalonia in Barcelona, people can gather and do their sacred sardana dance in the square in front of the cathedral. They would lock you up a couple decades ago if you did that. But now is a different age. You can wave your Catalonian flag instead of the soccer flag to show your patriotism. And you can actually teach your kids your language in school and at home. In Catalonia, the kids learn Catalonian first and Spanish second. I was trying to figure this out. I asked my Catalonian friend, okay, so you guys in Catalonia are a region of Spain, right? No, we're not a region of Spain. That implies we're part of Spain. We are a nation without a state. There's a big distinction there, you see. And they're proud of that. And I think it's fascinating. In fact, if you go to a Subway sandwich shop in Madrid, you're likely to see the menu in 4 different languages, and they're all Spanish languages. There are these proud regions now that speak their own languages. Here is an ATM machine, language buttons in Barcelona. The top button would be Catalan, that's the local language. The second button would be Espanol for most Spanish people. The third would be Gallego for the people of northwestern Spain, the Celtic people in Santiago de Compostela. Euskara would be here for Basque people. Then you got a button for Germans, French, English, and everybody else. Now, if you were to go to Basque country, you would find the same buttons on the ATM. You would have Basque language first, but you would have Catalan up there. Not because Catalonians traveling in Basque country need it. They'd speak Spanish or English, fine. But because, as a matter of solidarity, the Basques will respect the language and the legitimacy of their fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority. I was recently traveling in Ulster, Northern Ireland, a pretty gray, bleak place without a lot of tourism, and I saw a lot of Basque and Catalonian tourists up there. And finally I asked them, what are all you Basque and Catalonians doing in Barcelona? And they say, we like to travel up here in Ulster because we like to be in solidarity with our fellow victims of the tyranny of the majority. In the case of Ireland, it would be the Catholics that live under the Protestant rule in the north. So they go up there and they hang out together and they can empathize with each other. It's fascinating stuff. This man is named Armin Walsh. Armin is the Indiana Jones of Tyrolean archaeologists. Now, Armin has these wild dreams and he needs lots of money to renovate the castles and make museums out of it. And when he needs money, he does not go to Vienna because he lives in Austria. He goes to Brussels. And when he goes to Brussels, he doesn't say, I got a great idea for Austria. Because Brussels, the European Union, is not funding false borders created after wars, like what makes Austria that border. Brussels is interested in funding ethnic regions. That's the truth. So Armin will go to Brussels and say, I don't need something for Austria, I need something for the Tyrol. And then Armin will get money, he'll go home, and he'll do something to celebrate the Tyrol. The Tyrol is an ethnic, honest region that includes part of modern-day Italy and Austria. All over Europe. Well, Europe is united now, and when you join Europe, you're either a net giver or a net receiver. Rich countries are net givers. They give more than they get back. Poor countries are net receivers. They take more than they put in. And the notion is that the entire free trade zone will have the same infrastructure. It's the same rationale that when the United States made our interstate system back in the days of Eisenhower, Mississippi got the same quality of roads as New York. There was no question who's paying in more or who's wealthy or anything like that. Your free trade zone is as strong as your weakest link. So today, when you travel around the poorest countries of Europe, you find them laced with freeways. When I first started traveling in Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Greece, there were literally no freeways. Today, they're laced with modern freeways. And every freeway there are all these new freeways, you'll typically find a European flag on a sign that says, this project, this is in Ireland, by the way, this project has received 85% financial assistance from the European Union. That means Germany and France paid for this road, and you Irish should be using it now. Get to work, we're going to compete with America. All my life, I have crossed the Gulf of Corinth in Greece on a funky little ferry. A couple years ago, I come down there and, whoa, where did this come from? That is not a Greek bridge. You know, the Greeks would use the funky ferry for the rest of time. This is a German bridge built in Greece so German trucks can get over the Gulf of Corinth in order to sell their gummy bears in the Peloponnesian Peninsula. That's what you do. I've talked to my German friends about how they're bailing out Greece and it's costing them billions of dollars. They say, yeah, we've made so much money off of the Greeks. Every once in a while, we got to shore them up so they can continue to be our trading partners. You know, that's sort of the honest approach. That's why Germany has to do that. Europe is investing in its infrastructure like we can hardly imagine. Every year, faster and faster trains and more freeways and tunnels and bridges. It's like an internal Marshall Plan. The trains in Europe now have to be pass-through trains. Remember the old traditional trains that would come in at a terminal and then pull out and go along? No more. The trains won't stop there. You need an underground modern station like that, okay? I was just on a train in France I was up and just relaxing in the passenger area. The speedometer only turned on when it exceeded 300 kilometers an hour. That's about 200 miles an hour. It was smooth, it was silent, beautiful pastoral French countryside going by, and then before I know it, I'm in Paris. Wow. It's breathtaking. I just love to experience that high-tech, futuristic infrastructure. Recently, I was in Munich taking pictures of trains coming into the station, specifically taking pictures of what were cute little birds squished onto the windshield. Oh, man. When I looked at that little bird, I thought two things. First, I thought, this is one dangerous continent if you happen to be a slow bird. And then I thought, this is a surreal image. You'd wait all your life to see an image like that where I live. I don't know about here in Savannah, but in Seattle, Charlotte, right? Charlotte. I don't get around America very much. I don't know about Charlotte, named after King George's queen, right? I learned that. I don't get around much here, but I know in Seattle, you'd wait all your life to see a bird squished to the window of a train. Are there fast trains over here? I don't think so. I mean, I could see a bird sitting on a folding chair, or smoking a cigarette and enjoying a drink on the rooftop, but not squished to the windshield of a train like this. So it is quite an amazing thing when you travel around Europe and you see this infrastructure. Now, sadly, you see a lot of this also. And when we see graffiti that is angry about the United States, it's hurtful, and you wonder what's going on with them. And I've been dealing with this for 30 years as a tour guide, and nobody wants to go to a continent where they don't like you. And I've been through ups and downs with wars and presidents and trade policies and so on. And, you know, it's just an ongoing issue. The brand of America. What do people think about America? Well, you see this a lot. When you do see a Stop USA sign, it's not anti-you or me, I can tell you that. And it's not anti-American ideals. The ideals of America, what made America great, are shiny ideals that inspire civilized people all over this planet. Freedom, free enterprise, democracy, pluralism, all of that kind of stuff. That's forever the American ideals. Much bigger and stronger than any particular war or trade policy or president. This is frustration with American perceived militarism and aggressive trade policies. And, you know, it doesn't matter what I think. And frankly, it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what the other 96% of humanity thinks when they look at us. So let me just explain a little bit about what the rest of the world thinks when they look at us. First of all, they see 4% of the planet, we Americans, spending as much as everybody else put together on weapons and military. And they know even in tough times, we'll close schools, we'll close parks, but we will not cut back on our military. To the rest of the world, we are crazed for military. They see the only country on the planet that can declare somebody else's natural resources on the other side of the globe vital to our, quote, national security interest. And they wish we were at least candid enough to say vital to our accustomed material lifestyle, you see. They know that when an issue of desperate importance to the poor, desperate half of humanity, that half of humanity trying to live on $2 a day and raise their kids on that, when there's an issue that really matters to them, the only way you can address it is in the United Nations. And when it is brought to a vote in the United Nations routinely, the issues that matter most to the desperately poor, we are outvoted here in the United States 140 to 4. Who stands with us on issues like child labor, water, landmines, third world debt relief? It's the United States, Israel, Marshall Islands, and Micronesia against everybody else. Now, I try to be credible, and that sounds uncredible, like it would hurt my believability, so I visit the United Nations website every year. Doesn't matter if it's Bush or Obama as president. 30 or 40 times we are outvoted 140 to 4 on issues like this, and it's just not good for the brand of America, because people just don't understand why we would stand in the way of those kind of things. There's also trade policies that really frustrate and anger people. Now, most of us Americans don't know the ramifications of our trade policies south of the border. We'd rather not know, to be honest. We know about trade policies, how they affect us here. And we will do anything to enrich our farmers and to enrich our factories, regardless of what it means to people who are poor south of our border. If you live in a country that grows peanuts, you cannot export peanut butter. You have to export raw peanuts, cheap, so other people can make the serious money off of your peanuts and process it in a rich country. That's just the standard operating procedure on the planet right now. If you go to Haiti right now, you'll find vast stretches of land that used to grow rice that are no longer planted, because there's a shack across the street that sells rice grown in the United States of America and sold at a price that no local farmer could ever compete with, because it's subsidized here by our government for whatever political reasons are necessary. It's nice to help the farmers here, but we have to remember it has an impact on poor people, and that causes a problem. I'm involved a lot in the drug policy reform discussion in our country, and I learn a lot about it when I go to Europe. When you go to Denmark, there's a hippie community, kind of a squatter settlement, where you got a bunch of old hippies and idealistic parents living in geodesic domes who knit their children's sweaters and smoke a lot of pot. And it's called Christiania. It's this little squatter community in Copenhagen. And every time I leave, I'm reminded by my Danish friends, be careful with your marijuana here in Denmark, because every year we have to arrest a couple pot smokers in order to maintain favored trade status with the United States. And it just seems crazy to me. But then I learn about it, and I realize the United States wrote a treaty that everybody in the United Nations needed to sign that requires every nation to declare a trade war on any other nation that decides to treat marijuana as a health problem instead of a criminal problem, you see. So these are complicated issues, but other people have problems with our trade policies because it really impacts them, and that's why you'll see this kind of frustration vented. You do not need to accessorize with a Canadian flag. That's the good news. I mean, there are more Americans wearing Canadian flags than there are Canadians in Europe. And to me, it's kind of silly, because I find people really like us Americans. Unless we want to teach them how they're supposed to run their countries, and then we can have a debate, and they're pretty well schooled in their own values. A lot of Americans are frustrated at Europeans, especially the French, for not supporting us in our wars. And they say, well, don't they remember what we did for them against Hitler? And, it's true, they don't support all our wars, but they certainly remember what we did for them back in the 40s when they were in their most difficult times. I could give a whole talk on anecdotal little examples of how Europeans are so thankful, forever thankful, for us freeing them from Nazi tyranny. For instance, a couple years ago, I was filming in Burgundy, the most traditional part of France, visiting a chateau run by a wonderful mom-and-pop aristocratic couple whose family had run that thing for centuries. Come in, and the sun's going down. I need to get up on the roof to get a nice shot of the ramparts while there's still some sunlight. And I'm just got my wheels turning because I'm in my TV production mode. And they say, oh, we must have a party. We have some Americans here. No, I got to get up on the roof. We can have a party later. No, we must have a party now. Sit down. Here comes the wine. Here comes the cheese. Here comes the nice bread. And then here comes, like a religious relic, the precious 48-star flag that they hoisted over their village on that great day in 1944 when they were freed from Nazi tyranny by American troops. And they said, we will never have Americans in our castle without bringing out our flag and thanking you and reminding you to go home and tell your neighbors that here in our town we will forever be thankful for the compassion and the strength of America that came to our rescue in our darkest days. The same thing is true with United States relieving Europe from the threat of communism in the Soviet Union. That's really appreciated. There's a lot of Europeans a few years older than me that I've met named Frankie and Johnny. And that's just a beautiful thing. They don't name their kids Frankie and Johnny anymore, but there's a lot of older guys named Frankie and Johnny because they were so inspired by our troops and what we did for them. But if 60 years later we go to a war and we're mad at them for not following us, we need to respect that they're a sovereign nation and they're less quick to go to war than us in some occasions. A lot of Americans are concerned about terrorism, and as a tour promoter I have to deal with this. And I'll tell you, I'm really as concerned as any about mass terrorism within our country. I think that's a serious issue, and we should be vigilant. But I think we all have to get a grip when it comes to what's the risk of you or me traveling overseas in respect to terrorism. Because it's a minuscule risk. It is an insignificant risk. The risk of you or me getting hurt by a terrorist overseas. All right, 12 million Americans go to Europe every year. 12 million come back. You wouldn't believe how many people ask me, is it safe to go over there? Can I go to Norway? Can I go to Bulgaria? Can I go to Turkey? Can I go to Latvia? Yes, you can go to all those places. Yes, you can go to all those places. Now, tomorrow, if an American is beheaded by a jihadist in Madrid, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. 1,000 of us were killed by guns on our streets this month. All right? Every month we lose 1,000 people on our streets, and that's, according to our society, a reasonable price for 300 million people to pay to have the important right to bear arms. You could make that case. I think it's reasonable. If you want to bear arms, it costs you 1,000 people a month. We're a free and a democratic society. We could change that tomorrow if we wanted to. We choose not to, okay? Now, Europe decided not to have all the guns. They don't have that right. And they lose 1/20 of the people to violence on their streets as a consequence. When Europeans hear that Americans are staying home for safety reasons, they laugh out loud. If you care about your loved ones, you will take them to Europe tomorrow. So I'm just concerned that the irony is a lot of people hate terrorism and they won't travel because of it. And if you want to do something about terrorism, I think the most effective thing you can do to fight terrorism is to travel and to let those people know who we are and how good we are. When you and I travel, it makes it more difficult for their government to demonize us with their propaganda. And when we travel, it makes it more tough for our government to demonize them with our propaganda. It's a powerful force, travel. Every country has its own 4th of July. I remember when I was a kid, I thought the 4th of July was the greatest thing. And then I traveled and I realized, well, in Norway, it's May 17. And in Switzerland, it's August 1st. And in France, it's 10 days after ours, Bastille Day. It's so much fun to celebrate other people's festivals, too. I was raised thinking the world is a pyramid, with us on top and everybody else trying to get there. And then I traveled around the world and I realized people don't have the American dream, necessarily. Norwegians have the Norwegian dream. Moroccans have the Moroccan dream. These Sri Lankans have the Sri Lankan dream. Honestly, they don't have our dream, and that's okay. It's not unpatriotic to accept that. It's a beautiful thing. They don't aspire to have 2 cars in every garage, you see. In fact, it's a good thing that everybody doesn't aspire to do that, because I don't think this planet can handle it. But it's fun when you go travel around the world and you realize people have different dreams and people have different challenges. People have different passions. People have different baggage. I'm so impressed by people's spine overseas. I was once in Afghanistan, just traveling through. In Kabul, I went to the cafeteria where travelers go. I was just sitting down minding my own business. A man sat next to me, said, "Can I join you?" I said, "You already have." He said, "Are you an American?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a professor here in Afghanistan, and I want you to know that 1/3 of the people on this planet eat with spoons and fingers, or spoons and fork like you do. 1/3 of the people eat with chopsticks, and 1/3 of them eat with fingers like I do. And we're all just as civilized." He said, "We're all civilized just the same." I remember how he said it. I thought, boy, you got a chip on your shoulder. And then I thought about it later, and I thought, he probably thinks I thought less of him because he was eating with his fingers. And he was right. And then I realized I was ethnocentric about that. And for the rest of my trip through South Asia, I was going to fancy restaurants filled with professional local people in restaurants where there was no spoons and no forks. Beautiful restaurants, fine people, ceremonial sink in the middle of the dining hall where people would wash their hands, sit down, and use their fingers for what God intended them to do, nourish themselves. It became quite normal for me. In fact, when I got home, I had to be retrained. There are so many struggles going on. Every year, 10 languages go extinct on this planet. 10 languages. That means 10 ethnic groups lose their fight. They don't always do it gently and gracefully, you see. That's a very interesting fact. And when you travel, you realize this, the struggles people have. I was recently in Turkey, in eastern Turkey, taking a group around as assisting one of our Turkish tour guides. When you're in Turkey, eastern Turkey especially, you don't have a list of famous sites. You're just out on a cultural scavenger hunt. What's going on? You come upon a stadium filled with high school kids having a rally, stop the bus, go in, see what's happening. 200 kids thrusting their fist up in the air, screaming together, "We are a secular nation. We are a secular nation." I asked my guide, "What's going on? Don't they like God here?" And she says, "No, we love God, but considering the rising tide of Islamic fundamentalism just over our border to the east, we're very concerned about the fragile and precious separation of mosque and state here in Turkey that Ataturk gave to us in the 1920s with our constitution. As a matter of fact, our military is required, according to the Constitution, to overthrow our own government if it ever becomes a theocracy and puts prayer in school." I just thought, wow, I never even thought about separation of mosque and state. And now when I'm in Turkey playing backgammons with my friends in the back streets of Istanbul, and a fundamentalist walks by with his woman covered in a burqa, you can feel the chill. And you can see how modern secular people are threatened by that. Now, I've been in Iran, which is a theocracy, and I've been in Turkey, which is a Muslim, secular, modern democracy. And I've thought a lot about prayer in school. Most people who want prayer in school are caring, loving people, Christians or Muslims, who are worried about other people's salvation. They want their kids to go to heaven. And there should be prayer in school, because we know that's right. But the irony is that a lot of people don't get is that when you dictate it from the top, it becomes hollow. At least that's Iran's experience. I was in Iran, and they dictate all this stuff, and the little girls dress like little nuns, you know? And I just felt the most hollow faith in that country. And then you come to Turkey, where it's a grassroots kind of Islam, and I really felt a much stronger faith in the country where it could grow in a healthy way from the bottom up instead of dictated from the top down. It's interesting stuff that we encounter in our travels. For me, it's exciting to think that Nathan Hale, Patrick Henry, Ethan Allen, all great guys who wish they had more than one life to give for their country. So inspiring. And then you travel and you realize other countries have Nathan Hales also. And for me, it's a good challenge to try to get my brains around a contemporary Nathan Hale. A good example is when you go to Central America, Archbishop Oscar Romero. Archbishop Oscar Romero stood with the peasants, the landless people, when they're having their civil war 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And you know, that was we were involved in that war, Contras, Sandinistas, all that stuff. And we framed it as a war of communism. There was, you know, communists that didn't want big business people to have their rights to own all the land. But from a peasant's point of view, it was a struggle to have enough land to grow rice and beans to feed your kids. Because if it was free enterprise, whoever had more money could buy all the land. And any big shot with a lot of money, when they buy land, they're not going to grow rice and beans to be consumed locally. They're going to want to turn a profit on that land. That means grow stuff that can be exported to a rich country up north and get a good return. And then you become an economic elite in that country. And you have peasants working on your fields, and there's no food to be grown locally and consumed locally, so they get canned food from the United States to sell in the little shop on the plantation. That's called cash cropping, and that's kind of what the fight was about. Archbishop Oscar Romero stood with the peasants that wanted land. He said, "I'll probably be assassinated, but I will rise in my people." And sure enough, he was shot down, and he rose in his people. I've been down there on 4 different tours during his time and since, with educational tours to talk to different people and see what was going on, and it's just a fascinating experience. A few years ago, I was due for a vacation with my family. We were going to go to the beach in Mazatlan, and I was ready for a pristine stretch of tropical beach, swept free of local riffraff, just me and my friends, with plastic straps on our wrists so we could have unlimited margaritas, not even get our fingers dirty with local coins. Can you imagine? And then they invited me to go to San Salvador to remember the 25th anniversary of the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero. I told my family, I'm not going to be any fun on the beach. Sorry, I got to go to San Salvador. I went to San Salvador. It was one of the most powerful experiences in my life. Cheaper than going to Mazatlan. Every bit as safe. Perfectly accessible, but nobody does it. Everybody goes to Cancun or Mazatlan. It's an option. You can go to Managua instead of Mazatlan if you want to. 2 days into that trip, I was covered with bug bites, eating rice and beans one day and beans and rice the next, marching with people, gaining an affinity for their struggles. I was marching with thousands of people on the street of the capital of San Salvador, and we came to a monument. And I looked at this monument and I thought, wait a minute, that's our monument. That's the Vietnam Memorial. It's a perfect knockoff of our Vietnam Memorial with just as many names chipped into that black granite. And I realized 50,000 names are chipped into this, and all of those people died fighting you and me. Now, maybe they were communists and we needed to kill them. I don't know. That's a different discussion. But the fact is, there's 5 million people in El Salvador, and they lost as many people as we lost in Vietnam fighting us. That's baggage that lives to this day, you see. And I often think how heavy the baggage of 9/11 is. We lost 2,800 people, the 300 million of us. That was tragic. That's a day we should never forget. But I think we need to keep it in perspective and respect the fact that other countries have their own 9/11s, and we need to know how that impacts them and what they do. And that brings me to Iran. A couple of years ago, I had the chance to go to Iran, and I was scared. I mean, we were going to make a TV show in Iran. And, my friends asked me, why are you going to Iran? And I thought, well, I'm going to Iran because I think it's good character to know people before you bomb them. Sometimes you have to kill people. I'm not a pacifist. But it should hurt. We're all children of God, and if you have to kill somebody, it should hurt. And it is the inclination of a government to dehumanize its enemies so you can kill them, and they're just gooks. Their life is cheap for them. And it's really not cheap for them. And that's, for me, just a responsibility. For every bomb that flies, drops, and for every bullet that flies, my name is written on it, and I take a personal responsibility. And I wanted to go to Iran and understand what made these people tick. Now, I'm lucky because I got a TV show, so I got to take my film crew there and share what I learned. Went over there, I was afraid. We almost left our big camera in Athens because I thought they'd be throwing stones at an American film crew on the streets of Tehran. Got over there, and on day 2, it occurred to me, man, this is the friendliest place I've ever traveled. I was so glad we brought our big camera. I was bowled over by the welcome, but it was very awkward because while the people were friendly, everything around me was hateful. Here's a flag 10 stories tall with an American flag on it, made not of stars and stripes, but of skulls and dropping bombs that says, "Down with America." Man, that's painful. That's very painful, and it's confusing. But down in the streets, there's 12, this is 30 years old, by the way. Down in the streets, there's people who are not even born when that was painted, and they're clogging the streets in traffic jams. There's 12 million people in Tehran, and we had a lot of traffic jams. Once I was just stuck in a traffic jam, silent, sitting there in the back seat, and the man in the next car, remember, he went like this to my driver. So my driver rolled down the window, and he handed over a bouquet of flowers, and he said, "Give this to the foreigner in your back seat and apologize for our traffic." I don't know about here, but that doesn't happen in Seattle. Okay. Later on, we were in another traffic jam, and it was just silent. We were sitting in the traffic jam, being patient, and suddenly the driver just blurted out, he said, "Death to traffic." And I thought, wait a minute, I thought it was death to Israel or death to America. He said, "No, right now it's death to traffic." And I said, "Well, what's with that?" And he said, "Here in Iran, when something is frustrating us and out of our control, we say death to that." That was his explanation. And I thought, well, he doesn't speak English very well. He speaks Farsi, and he's trying to explain it to me. And what he's saying is, we say damn that. Damn America. Damn election fraud. And I thought, have I ever thought damn? Have I ever thought, like, damn those teenagers? Well, sure. Now, do I really want them to die and burn in hell for an eternity? No, it's just after midnight. Turn down the music. When you are in Iran, you hear people saying death to everything. Death to Obama, death to election fraud, death to Ahmadinejad. That's how they get mad, you know, and I don't want to excuse things for them, but it is good for us to have a little more sophisticated understanding of that kind of stuff. Traveling in Iran, we just learned so much, and I would encourage anybody who's curious to go there themselves and check it out. One thing I learned was about their baggage. I mentioned we have 9/11 baggage. We lost 2,800 people. They've got Iran-Iraq war baggage. 20 or 30 years ago, they were invaded by Saddam Hussein, who was funded by the United States, and they lost several 100,000 people. That'd be the equivalent of us being invaded by somebody and we lost 1 million people. Now, maybe we didn't fund them. A lot of Americans can't imagine we funded Saddam Hussein. Again, it doesn't matter. What the Iranians believe is that America funded Saddam Hussein and he invaded. They had the carnage on their front that France and Germany had in World War I. It's amazing. And today, every town in Iran has a vast martyrs cemetery filled with, you know, tombs of guys that died fighting Saddam Hussein. That's baggage. And when we went to these martyrs cemeteries, they were as alive with mourners today, 20 or 30 years after that war, as they were the month after that war. It was amazing, the passion and the pain and the sorrow when you see a widow sitting on the tomb of her husband, as she has every week for 30 years, you know. That's baggage, and I believe we need to understand that and respect it. I was taught a lot by the people I met and the people I talked to, and I was just doing my work on the streets one day in Isfahan, and a well-dressed woman came across the street and she said, "Are you an American journalist?" And I said, "Yes." And she did one of these things with me, you know, pointing on my chest. She said, "I want you to go home and tell the truth. We're strong, we're united, and we just don't want our little girls to be raised like Britney Spears." And I thought, we got something in common here. And I tried to figure out what was motivating her. And I realized she grew up under the Shah. The Shah of Iran was put in 1953 when their democratic elected Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalized their oil. You just can't do that. Britain and America got rid of Mossadegh, put in the Shah, and we had good policy for the oil to come to us. And that wasn't even important to these people. What was important is the regime change brought Western values into their culture from their Shah. And they were bragging during that time that the miniskirts are shorter in Tehran than they were in Paris. That's, I believe, what really angered people. And when I got to talk to these people, and I was trying to figure out how can they vote for Ahmadinejad, I realized Ahmadinejad's political base is not the sophisticates in the big city, but it's the salt of the earth small town people. Ahmadinejad is put in power by small town, less educated fundamentalists, motivated by the same thing their counterparts are here in the United States. They're good people motivated by fear and love. And I thought, this is very hopeful, if we can just understand that. They don't want their little girls to become boy toys, crass materialists, and drug addicts. And it scares the hell out of them. And that's what they think will happen if we put another Shah on the throne. And when we say regime change, they hug their children tighter, and they vote for Ahmadinejad. It's complicated, and it's just important for us to understand Iran a little better than what Ted Koppel taught us in Nightline, because I don't know about you, but that's all I knew about Iran until I went there. I had so much fun just meeting the people. I was in the monuments where all the school groups were, and I love to take pictures of them. I don't speak Farsi, but I can still hear the teacher yelling at these girls, barking at them. I know what she was saying. She was saying, "Girls, this Western gentleman's going to take your photograph, and you look like a bunch of floozies. Cover your hair." So they giggle and they cover their hair, and then we can get our picture taken like that. Beautiful people. It just makes you happy to go there and connect. I got about 10 more minutes. I know I'm talking late, but I'm sorry about that. But I want to talk a little bit about liberty, because, you know, we love our liberty, and there are places that think they got as much liberty as us, and where Salvador Dali is born, Caracas, they even have double our liberty, okay? When you travel around the world, you see this joy of life and culture. In a little town in Italy, I love it when they have their annual festival where the older kids are teaching the younger kids how to make a good ravioli. And you go to a small town in France, and the Chamber of Commerce has put the money together to make these orbs so visitors can go around and smell the fine differences in their local wine. because a good nose is a life skill worth having in that part of France. All over Europe, I find people eagerly pay too much for their bread in order to buy it from the person who baked it. That's just a different ethic. It makes no sense economically, but it's part of their family values. It's part of their slow food, you see. And it's an interesting challenge. That's their choice. Europeans love their fine wine, and they know where to fill it up cheap. The cheapest drink you can buy in Spain is wine at a filling station. A couple times a year, people load their car up with their empty jugs, and they go there and they just fill them all up. In the United States, I'm fascinated by how we are pretty willing to legislate morality. And my European friends tell me a society has to make a choice: tolerate alternative lifestyles or build more prisons. And then they always remind us we Americans lock up 10 times as many people per capita as they do. Either we are inherently more criminal or we got some screwy laws. Now, everybody here is a moral person. We care about morality. But if any one person had the right to dictate and legislate their morality and all the rest of us, that would be difficult because all of us have a different morality, if you get right down to it. And the Europeans, I find, are, rather than this just say no stuff or moralizing, they're pragmatic about it, and they motor their policies by what they call pragmatic harm reduction. A good example is prostitution. Nobody would say prostitution's a good thing. But there's always been horny men with money that will buy sex from women who are willing to sell it. That's just always going to happen. Now, in Europe, they got legal brothels all over the place. What's the idea? They treat these women like small business people. They're unionized. They are licensed, and they only get a license when they are checked over by a doctor so they're not passing diseases. And they have their own little shop where they work. And when they get a dangerous customer and they push their emergency button, they're not rescued by a pimp, but they're rescued by a policeman. That's just how they want to treat this reality that there will be prostitution. It doesn't work quite that simple, but that's what they're trying to do. And it does make for an interesting sightseeing opportunity. I was at a restaurant in Switzerland a couple years ago, and I needed to go downstairs to the toilet. Went into the toilet, and all of a sudden I was surrounded by blue lights. Blue lights, I was confused, and then I remember, oh yeah, blue lights. I can't see my veins. I couldn't shoot up if I wanted to. Fascinating. Now they've got a lot of drug addicts on the streets. For years I took my tour groups over there, and people would say, these liberal Europeans, look they got drug addicts everywhere. Well, they don't have any more than us. Theirs are still alive, and they're not in prison. They're on the streets. Now, somebody who's got a restaurant doesn't want them in their restroom shooting up, so they do the blue lights. Now, across the street from that restaurant, I saw a machine that used to sell cigarettes. Now it's been rejiggered, and it sells government-subsidized syringes. That'd be a tough thing for us to get comfortable with, but I looked all over Switzerland, and I found that these are commonplace, bolted to the railings, machines that sell almost free syringes. Pragmatic harm reduction. They just don't want people spreading HIV. And they don't have that problem over there because nobody shares needles. And then down a small street where no tourists go, there's something called a Cafe Fix. It's a government-funded heroin maintenance clinic where wasted people go to get counseling and get their lives back on track and find a job. In Europe, in many countries, the word addicted is enslaved. They think people, when they are in drugs, are not criminals. They are sick people enslaved to drugs, and they want them dealing not with police and judges and cops and lawyers, but with doctors and counselors. Again, it's just a different way that Europeans deal with some of the same problems we do. But this year in the United States, we lost 18,000 people to heroin overdoses, and this year in Europe, last year, they lost 8,000 people. So they're doing something a little different than us, and it seems to work for them. And it's fun to learn about that. You know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the United States and Europe and how similar we are. We're Christian, we're affluent, we're capitalist, we love our democracies, we are government by, for, and of the people on both sides of the Atlantic. A difference that I think I see is that here on this side of the Atlantic, we are government by, for, and of the people via the corporations that we own. Now, that's not a judgmental statement. It just makes sense. If you have a business, you want a government to create an environment where your business can prosper. in our government creates a great environment for our businesses to prosper. In Europe, I find that it's government by, for, and of the people in spite of the corporations that they own collectively through all their stocks. In Europe, you'll find the government going to bat for concepts that businesses don't want. Sustainability, the environment, the future, that kind of stuff, which doesn't show up on a quarterly profit statement. So this is an interesting tangle that we're in right now, how we're gonna figure this out, because we need to be sustainable for the love of our children and their children. If you want to see Europe in the extreme, I find you go to Scandinavia. Scandinavia is the highest taxed part of Europe. It's the most educated, least church-going, most affluent, and by every survey, the most content people on the planet. So it's interesting to go there. And when you go to Scandinavia, you find, yeah, they don't go to church, but their religion is humanism. They really believe in active government, big good government. They don't throw away taxes. They pay high taxes with high expectations. And rather than a church with a spire on the main square, you see a city hall with a bell tower on the main square. In Stockholm or in Oslo, the city hall dominates. And you step inside and it's got a gathering place like a nave. It's got a pulpit, like a lectern like a pulpit. And it's got mosaics behind the pulpit or the lectern that don't trumpet Bible stories, but they celebrate heroic individuals who have contributed mightily to their community. In Scandinavia, that would be humanism. As a travel writer and a tour guide, I like to talk to a lot of Europeans and get a sense. I use them as a sounding board and ask them hard questions. This is Ollie, who teaches in the little village in Switzerland. He's the only school teacher in this little village where everybody has the same last name. It's a little humble peasant village. He's from the big city, and he teaches these kids. And I hang out with Ollie and his family, and I ask him questions. I tell Ollie, man, I would be frustrated if I had to pay such high taxes as you guys. How can you so docilely pay such high taxes here in Switzerland? And Ollie doesn't skip a beat. He just says, well, what's it worth to live in a country where there's no homelessness and no hunger, and where everybody, regardless of the wealth of their mom and dad, has access to quality health care and education? He's not a crusader. That's just the ethic of those people, and I find it challenging. Now, I've traveled a lot, and I know that Americans are beautiful, loving people. But one thing we're not very good at, one thing we're not very adept at, is dealing with the gap between rich and poor. And the gap between rich and poor is strong. It's huge in our country, and it's huge between us and the rest of the world, or the rich world and the poor world, and it's growing. That's the interesting thing. If you travel, honestly, you got your window open, and for all my life, I've had the poor, dirty fingers coming into the window at me, and you become aware of that. And I've traveled enough to know that even if you're motivated only by greed, if you know what's good for you, you don't want to be filthy rich in a desperately poor world. It's just a miserable place to raise your children. And if you want to know more about that, go to a poor place and go to the rich neighborhoods in the poor place. Go to El Salvador, Nicaragua, Puerto Rico. You'll find middle-class neighborhoods have to pool their money to hire an armed guard. I was just down in El Salvador, Nicaragua for Christmas and New Year's last year, and every bank, every pharmacy, every hotel had an armed guard in front of it. I don't want that future. We've got that future if we don't do something about the gap between rich and poor right here. We can learn by going south of the border. You just don't want to raise your kids behind designer fortifications. Now, when you travel, you realize those little kids are just as precious as our little kids. I know my daughter gets $5,000 for straight teeth, and there's money left over for whitener. And I looked around and I noticed every girl and guy in her class apparently had the wherewithal to get $5,000 together for straight teeth and money left over for whitener. And that's not a guilt trip. We work hard, we have a winning system, our kids get straight teeth. But that doesn't change the reality that half the kids on this planet don't have moms. Their moms are walking for water every day. And for the cost of 2 sets of braces, you could drill a well in that thirsty village, and those moms could stay home. And a lot of Americans are really concerned about national security. I challenge you to think about soft power a little bit as opposed to hard power. It cost $1 million to keep a single soldier in Afghanistan for a year. With that money, you could drill 100 wells and get water to 100 thirsty communities in the most desperately poor parts of this planet, and then all those moms could stay home. And then every morning, instead of walking across the county for water, they'd walk across the street for water. And every time they pumped water and got beautiful, fresh drinking water for their families, they would think, God bless America. That would be powerful, I think. That would be good for our national security interest. We've got some pretty serious challenges confronting us as a nation. We've got a very serious problem with violent extreme Islam that has to be dealt with smartly. We've got climate change, we've got the gap between rich and poor, and we've got an opportunity as travelers to go out there and better understand the other 96% of humanity. That's what I'm excited about. Let me close with just one sort of image that is an example of how travel can open us up. As a tour guide, I love to introduce my people to a whirling dervish in Turkey. You know those whirling dervishes? You know, it's like cruise ship entertainment. They all whirl and get dizzy with strange music. I wanted to have my group see one of these guys pray. And I found one, and I said, "Hi, I'm a tour guide from the United States. I got 20 travelers, and we'd love to see you whirl." And he said, "I'm not a photo op, but if you'll let me explain what I'm doing, you're welcome to watch me pray." I said, "Cool, all right." So I went up on his rooftop, the sun was going down. He dressed up like he does 5 times a day, and he explained to us what he's doing. And I'll just paraphrase. He says, "I'm a dervish. It's like a monk. I follow Mevlana, or Rumi. He's kind of the St. Francis for Muslims, the prophet of love, easy to get your brain around. And 5 times a day, I meditate on the teaching of Mevlana, and I plant one foot in my community, my hometown, my family, my loved ones, and the other foot goes around acknowledging the variety on this beautiful planet that God has given us, all the diversity. One hand goes up to accept the love of our Creator, and the other hand, like the spout on a tea kettle, goes down and showers God's love on his beautiful creation. And 5 times a day, I whirl myself into a trance, meditating on that beautiful idea. I become a conduit of God's love, connecting God with this beautiful world we've been blessed with. I watched his head tilt over, his robe billow out. He lost himself in that thought. And then I looked at my tourists, and they were really impacted by this. And I thought, this is good travel. And I knew a person who was pretty scary and freaky to them became less scary, more meaningful. And my travelers went home with a little better understanding of this beautiful planet. And when you go home with that better understanding and then you implement that as a citizen, a caring citizen of the planet, as well as a more thankful America, that is making travel a political act. And I think bringing home that broader perspective is the most precious souvenir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very, very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
I'm guessing this works. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back in Charlotte, and I understand you had a chance to have a little local food today and understand a little bit our own slow food.
I had a great tour today. It was absolutely wonderful. I want to come back.
That's great. That's great. I'm Vicki Sutton with the World Affairs Council Board of Directors. I want to welcome you again on behalf of the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, and thank you for coming tonight. We want to take some questions. I know you have to have some questions. I have some of my own. There is a microphone here in the center of the room. If you would go to that microphone so that everyone can hear your question, and I'll drag this out so that we can get folks there.
Actually, if you just have a question, we can hear you, and we'll repeat it, too, if you're having a hard time getting to the mic for any reason.
Okay.
Yeah. Question about legalization of marijuana. We just legalized marijuana in Washington State. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill, and I'm partnered with our state federal prosecutor, our Seattle city attorney, professors, judges, and caring legislators. And we're very excited that we are going to tax, regulate, and legalize marijuana. Very strict, keep it away from kids. If you're caught intoxicated by anything, they'll throw the book at you. And employers maintain the right to enforce whatever standards they want in their workplace. But we're tired of enriching gangs and organized crime in our state with the second biggest cash crop after apples. So we see it as the current prohibition. I firmly believe marijuana use will not go up in Washington state. A lot of Americans think there's a reservoir of people that would love to ruin their lives smoking pot if it was only legal. But in Europe, they've not arrested pot smokers for a long time, and by every measure, Americans smoke double the pot that people do in most of Europe, including the Netherlands. A lot of people think marijuana is a gateway drug. They'll acknowledge, yeah, it's kind of innocuous. We used to smoke it, but right now, it's stronger, and one token, you're on the way to heroin addiction. My European friends have found the only thing gateway about marijuana is the fact that it's illegal, because then you have to get it from criminals in the street who have a vested interest in getting hooked on something more profitable and more addictive. So stay tuned. It's an experiment in Washington, but it's a serious problem. And in our country, we've got 80,000 people in jail today for smoking pot. And we arrest 1 million people a year for smoking pot. And they're not rich white guys like me. They're poor people, black people, and brown people. It's the new Jim Crow. But thank you for, I don't want to get sidetracked on marijuana policy, but you can Google Rick Steves and marijuana and learn more about that than you'll ever realize. Next question.
Who else?
What was the most difficult country to get into permit-wise to shoot your?
Oh, that's a very good question. What was the most difficult country with a big camera to shoot in? It's kind of interesting. The most difficult countries for the camera are the countries that have a lot of tourism, and they just want to charge you a lot and put up a lot of barriers. And the countries that really want more tourism will pretty much treat you royally. I'm going to be shooting 2 shows in Egypt coming up, and they're going to roll out all the red carpet for us, and we're going to get access to, I can sleep in King Tut's tomb if I want to. But if I go to Venice, it's like pulling teeth to get permission to take my camera into a church, you know, because they've got enough tourism. But regardless, these days we have to get permission to do whatever we're doing by TV, and tourism is a big part of the local economies, so they almost always they recognize this is a good thing. But they also want to get money, so I have to pay I pay about sometimes maybe $500 an hour to have my camera in a great museum. But it's exciting to be all alone with Mona Lisa, you know, so hard to put a price on that. But generally, if you have a lead time and you just are for real, they will let you take your camera into these sites. My biggest problem is there's 2 levels. There's amateur photographers and there's full-blown movie makers. And they think I'm going to close the place down, bring in dollies, have special lighting, and it's much more complicated than it needs to be. I'm just 3 guys with a camera and a tripod, and we can come in and be pretty stealth. So once they know that, they're less nervous about us.
Great. Other questions?
Yeah, just speak loudly. Stand up and speak loudly.
I love your show. You've given us a lot of insights that I've traveled a lot, but I haven't had the insights you have. You've obviously spent time in Asia. Would you draw similar conclusions, you know, based on your Asian experience as you do from your European experience? What would you say would be differences perhaps?
That's a very good question. He's asking me if I would draw similar conclusions from traveling in Asia that I have in Europe. You know, I hesitate to talk authoritatively about Asia because I haven't traveled there as much as Europe. I used to travel there a lot. I wrote a book once called Asia Through the Back Door, and I found that my basic philosophy of European travel works great in Asia. My favorite country is India. I love Sri Lanka, Nepal, Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, beautiful countries to travel in. I find myself attracted to Europe because that's my family, cultural, and religious roots. And I want to go there and kind of put this big puzzle together. And I find that we are sister societies dealing with the similar problems, and we can learn from each other. I think it's so exciting that we can learn from each other. They're learning from us about the beauties of an unencumbered, free enterprise environment for businesses. We're learning from them about, you know, taking care of having honest accounting and taking care of people who are not so good at capitalism and this sort of thing. And together we can share notes. As far as Asia goes, I love the thought of just getting out of my comfort zone. That's why India is my favorite country. India just humbles your ethnocentricity. I grew up thinking I knew music. I'm pretty well trained in music. And I always thought Indian music just sounded noisy to me. Go to India, they don't have any meter, they don't have any mode. It's completely a different language of music, and it is just as sophisticated as ours, and when you understand it, it's just as beautiful. And that was humbling to me. I grew up knowing time is money. We spend it, we invest it, we bank it, we waste it, we just talk about it like it's money. And you go to India, and time is, it's like bubble gum. You can just chew it and blow things with it, and you can play with it. And it's really frustrating if you're a time is money American or German, and you go to India, and things aren't going to happen right now. And you got to get over that, or you're going to have a miserable time in India. Did I nail that? For some people? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there somewhere on the earth that you want to go and you either haven't had the opportunity or cannot go? And
Thank you very much. About the behind-the-scenes show, we once did a show about how we made our show. I'm a crew of 3. It takes us 6 days to make our half-hour show. And it's me, the cameraman, and the producer. And our editor, the guy at home that edits all this stuff together, he, every once in a blue moon, goes over with a little camera and shoots what we're doing. And he made a whole show when we were shooting Milano. And that's called The Making of Rick Steves. And you can watch it for free along with any of my other shows if you go to hulu.com. Just type in hulu.com and then you search for Rick Steves and Making of, or Iran, or Christmas, or Norway, or whatever you like. So you can see not our current series, but all 80 other shows are available there. You asked me, what was the first thing you asked me?
You haven't been.
Oh, someplace I haven't been that I want to go. I could go anywhere I want tomorrow, but I love my work so much. Can you imagine what a thrill it is for me to go there and talk to those guys in Iran or in Copenhagen or wherever and be able to come back and talk to people like you? I mean, it's just, I just think it's such a beautiful little niche I've found, and just for me a thrill to be able to try to learn and then come home and challenge my friends to go over there and get out of our comfort zones and have those truths we were raised thinking are self-evident and God-given challenged. So when I get free time, I go back to Europe. If somebody said you can have an all-expenses-paid trip to Fiji anytime you want this next year for 10 days, I probably wouldn't have 10 days to take it because I'd rather spend 10 days giving talks like this or going to Europe and make my Portugal book better, which is I'm just a sick person. But someday I'd like to go to the South Pacific. I would dream about going to the South Pacific. This last year I went up to Alaska for my first time and did a cruise up there and just got all the natural wonders because I'm really tuned into the history and the art wonders of Europe, and that was fun. But I would say South Pacific to answer your question. Maybe South America too. I don't know. Lots of good places to go. Yes, in the back there.
I really wouldn't feel comfortable as a woman going to some of the Muslim countries because of their beliefs. I feel very uncomfortable and wouldn't be free enough to experience the culture that you have.
So everyone can hear.
Is there any way around that, or do women just avoid those countries
So
when they're traveling solo?
So I can repeat that. As a solo woman that would, as an adventurous spirit, would like to go to the Muslim countries, the strict Muslim countries, but doesn't really feel comfortable going there when they treat the women the way they do. I would remind you to learn a little bit about Iran before you condemn them for treating their women the way they do. Because they can't believe how we treat our women. Now, of course, they're victims of a lot of fear and a lot of incursions from the West and a lot of abuse and a lot of propaganda, and they might not be very well educated in Western ways. But if you ask an Iranian who respects their women more, an Iranian or an American, they would agree Iranians respect their women more. Because in America, women are dressed up in little tight bikinis and put on revolving pedestals at car shows to advertise hot rods, right? With the bigger the breasts, the better. The tighter the little skirt, the better. Now, of course, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the truth is, we use women to sell cars. For sure we do. I mean, we use women to sell news. We have sexier women talking about the news today than 10 years ago, don't we? It's what works. In Iran, they think that is disrespectful. In Iran, a woman can be dolled up in all sorts of Victoria's Secret stuff and be the sexiest thing anywhere at home. But on the streets, she's not to be leered at by other men. I'm not defending this, I'm just explaining it from their perspective. A lot of Americans know it's miserable in Iran because there's a car just for women on the subway. Well, I was on that train, and there's women in the men's car, but there's one car limited for women and children alone so they can be away from leering men. And the women I talked to told me maybe in New York the women wish they had a car just for women also. You see,
Point.
women in Iran can go to badminton matches, they can go to lacrosse, but they can't go to soccer because they're going to hear the F word at the soccer stadium, and they shouldn't be subjected to that. So it's different than what we see. But I would think most American women think it's disgusting that Muslim men worship in the main section and the women have to worship over here or in the back, right? Well, 100 years ago, most Christians were that way too, or 200 years ago, and we're all evolving on a parallel track, so we have to be a little patient with these people, but we treated our women the same way a little while ago. But you also got to remember, by the nature of the way Muslims pray, it's not nice for men to be behind women. I mean, imagine going to Jazzercise as a man and being in the back row with all these beautiful female butts up in the air because they pray like this, and you're supposed to be thinking about God. You can't do it. You just cannot do it. I've tried. So because people they put their head down and their butt up, you just can't have a man behind a woman in a mosque. And that's just a practical reason why the women worship. Now, granted, the men get the center, but you know, we have a male-dominated world too. In Iran, there are more women in the professions and more women with a college degree, except in the professions of military and politics, similar to our country. So, you know, if you go to Iran or Egypt, you're going to need to put a scarf over your head. If you go to Turkey, you'll be more comfortable respecting the local system and putting a scarf over your head. You know, but you can go there, and if I was you, I'd go there and be indistinguishable from a local woman. And when you're in a rich neighborhood with cosmopolitan people, you can pull your scarf back and show a little hair. It's kind of exciting. For 10 days, I was in Iran, and I'm a people watcher. I love looking at people, mostly women. In Europe, that's what keeps me, like, just entertained. I look at beautiful people. And when I was in Iran, I saw a lot of beautiful women, but I stopped looking here at the cleavage because there was never any action here. Women are wrapped up to here. But in Iran, you cannot show any hair. If you look at the newscasters who are women, they're completely wrapped up so there's no hair. If you go to a rich club, the women still have a scarf, but they pull it back a little bit and you get a little knotty hair falling out up here. And I'll tell you, after 10 days in Iran, this is very exciting. I found myself getting turned on by this. So I just love, you know, I think getting out there and experiencing that, man or woman, is a great opportunity. But, you know, you can talk to people and learn more about that.
I was going to say there's got to be another question.
Is there another question?
Is there one more question maybe from the audience? Right back here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A microphone user.
I work at a small college, and we use travel as a political act as part of our textbooks. But earlier on in your talk, you talked about the ethnocentricity of Americans. And my question is, are you in the school systems where you're beginning to help educate that travel does help overcome the ethnocentricity?
Thank you. You know, I know the World Affairs Council and the National Association of Foreign Study Advisors and caring teachers all over this country are really committed to the value of students in our country getting over and having a foreign study experience. I'm so excited and impressed by the commitment. Even in tough times, it's quite a financial investment with a family to send their kid abroad. And it's recognized as part of a full, well-rounded higher education these days. I would love to work with them. It's complicated because there's a lot of people that are scared about these kind of ideas, and you know, even stuff that I say can offend people, but I try to say it in a way that don't blame me, I just hang out with a lot of Europeans and I'm sharing what they think. And I always acknowledge that it's complicated and caring people can see things differently. But I do like the idea of being challenged by smart people who have been raised in a different culture. And I will err on the side of being, it's kind of like I'm the present day medieval jester. You know, in the Middle Ages, the king gave the jester room and board, and his job was to be annoying. He had to go outside and hang out with the poor people, and then he came back into the castle and he told the king the truth. And that was his function. And as travelers, and as travel teachers, I think we can do that. And as teachers, I think you can have that initiative. I have a program on my website, it's called Rick Steves for Teachers, where we offer our most appropriate material, our art book, Travel as a Political Act, and all my TV shows at essentially our cost, cheaper than any wholesaler gets it, because I just would like to equip teachers who want to use my stuff in their classrooms. I'd love to do it. And it's just hard to get that out because the institutions are slow to embrace that, so it's just the odd teacher that hears about that. That's why a lot of you picked up the Rick Steves for Teachers publication out there. It's just a little free. It's a chapter out of the Travel as a Political Act book. But all of my talks are available on the web, and people are more than welcome to use them in any way they want. I'm just very, very excited when teachers do use our program. If I could just remind you one more time, I know the World Affairs Council has purchased a lot of these books and they need to sell them and it'll help them raise money. And this is the book we were talking about today. That's $15. And the other things, the new TV series, the Symphonic Journey, and the budget travel book, Europe Through the Back Door, are all here for $20. And I'll be happy to autograph things afterward. And tonight I'm going to drive to Champaign, Illinois.
Ooh.
So I'm going to learn a lot about the beautiful mountains in the dark.
Wow. Wow.
And sorry, I mixed up I know what a politician's like now when they go to the wrong state and say Iowa or something like that. But it's been so beautiful to be here, and thank you for your interest in this sort of thing and your support of the World Affairs Council. And again, I'll be out there happily autographing books and chatting a little bit if you like. So thank you very much.
Let's thank you, Rick Steves, again.